Now we're up to Daf Yutes Amid Beis. Okay, so we have now from the Gemara that we did on Amid Aleph, Rav Shita, that when the Torah repeats itself twice, that's proving le'ikuva, like in the Korban Mincha. Kufa, Omar Rav, Kol Malkum Shehichsilucha Kasu B'Toras Mincha, Eino El Yaakov, Ushmuel Omar Geres V'Shemen Ma'akvin. Right? You need the flour and the oil, and that's essential. But the ain't over acher miyakiv. So what does that mean? That there's an exceptional requirement of oil and flour in terms of the mincha. And as a general rule, Shmuel rejects Rav that when the Torah repeats itself, it's essential. Ula Shmuel afal gav the tana means repeat. Afal gav the tana bekra, even if the Torah repeats itself lo liakvele, he doesn't accept that principle that when the Torah repeats itself, it's critical. The Gemara can't accept that. In other words, this principle, although it was stated by Rav, was universally accepted. Elokol hecha de tana bekra, when the Torah repeats itself, varimak, for certainly Shmuel agrees to Rav. V'hacha, what is the machlokas here between Shmuel and Rav? Be melo kumto bekumto kamiflagi. What does that mean? The machlokas here between Rav and Shmuel with regard to what's likuva revolves around what we derive from these psukim of bekumto and kumto. Desanyo, because we learned in the Brisa. In one pasuk it says melo kumto. In another pasuk it says bekumto. So this is the kmitza. And this teaches us, says the Brisa, Yase Mido Lekometz, meaning he's got to do the kmitza by hand and not through a kli. Rav Sover Hanami Tana Bekra. This requirement that the kmitza has to be done with the hand is based on the fact that the Torah repeats itself. Tichsiv Vayakrev es hamincha vaymalei kapo mimena. Oh, so now we're going back historically to an early period of time when Aaron HaKohen performed the kmitza by hand, as it says in the pasuk, vaymalei kapo mimena. So that itself is a repetition of the requirement of Yad Kohen for Kmitza. But Shmuel says, Doros Mishalo Yalfina, the fact that Aaron HaKohen at that time had to do the Kmitza with his own hands, that doesn't prove anything for all generations. He says the following. When Shmuel states that repetition indicates essentiality only with regard to the flour and the oil, he does not mean to limit the rule to this law. He is simply saying that the case of flour and oil is representative of the cases in which the rule holds, namely, this is Lidoros, where both iterations of the relevant edict are stated with regard to a permanent mincha, Lidoros. However, one iteration concerns a temporary mincha, So when you have something in the Torah that refers to both temporary mincha, like Aaron HaKohen, and permanent mincha, that repetition does not indicate essentiality. So just one second. So what is the machlokas now between Rav and Shmuel? That's what I'm trying to figure out. It just seems to be the mashmos darshan. He says the fine. The dispute between Rav and Shmuel's father. Rav holds that repetition teaches essentiality in all cases, even with regard to a temporary one. But Shmuel holds repetition is not. Okay, so at this point, we don't know that there's any nafkamina lamaisa between Rav and Shmuel. In fact, the Gemara v'lo yolef Shmuel doros mishavatnan. Oh, so how are we going to know that when you have a certain vessel that's dedicated to measure liquids and to be makadesh the liquids, that's klisharis, it cannot effectuate kiddush on solids and vice versa. And that's what it says in the Mishnah, which it tells you in Zvachim on Peiches Datnan Kli or Klei Halach, Mekachus Halach, Midos, meaning Kalim Yovesh, they used to measure something that's solid, is Mekachus Yovesh, Ve'ein Kli Lach, Mekachus Yovesh, Ve'ein Kli, Ve'ein Midos, Lo Midos Kli Mekachus Halach, Ve'omer Shmuel, Lo Shanu Elo Midos. There are two categories of kalim. There are kalim that are used to measure. Some are dedicated to measure liquids, some to measure solids. And then there are kalim that are not used for measuring, but rather for receiving as a receptacle. Like, for example, the mizrak, the basin in which they receive the dam. Avol mizrakos, which we just explained, mekachim, it sanctifies even solids. Tichsiv, and now we go back to the Nesiim at the time of the Chanukas HaMishkan and says Shneim Aleim Solas. So Shneim Aleim Solas is referring to this silver bowl, and even though it's usually used for kavos adam, it was designated for fluids, for liquids. Nevertheless, it could be makadosh even the flour, which is a solid. But you see that Shmuel is operating with or deriving, I would say, from the Mishkan. In this case, the Chanukas HaMishkan. And Shmuel is not inhibited here. He's willing to derive conclusions about what a Kli is capable of Kaddish from what went on at the time of the Mishkan. And yet we just finished saying that according to Shmuel, we don't derive any conclusions from Lishah to Lidoros. Shani Chosam, the Tana Bakra, Tresar Zimnin. This is a boon for a Balkore. When you get to the end of Parshas Noso, 12 times for the 12 Shvatim, it repeats itself over and over and over again. And each time it says Shnei Malem Solas. So again, normally Shmuel would admit that we don't derive conclusions lidoros from a temporary mincha at the time of the Mishkan, but this is the exceptional case because the Torah repeats itself 12 times. Shnei Malem Solas. Now again, Rav says that whenever the Torah repeats itself, it's likuva, and now the Gemara has a problem. Amalei Rav Kahan v'Asi l'Rav harei agosha The Tana Bakra, the Torah repeats itself with regard to Hagasha, v'lo ma'akvin, yet it's not ma'akiv. And the Mishnah says, Lo higish kshera. The Torah repeated itself. So the Gemara asks, Man Tanabe, where did the Torah repeat itself? Tichsiv, it says, Zos Torahs HaMincha Hakrev Osa B'nei Aaron Lifnei Hashem. So the word Hakrev is referring to Hagasha. And before that, there was another pasuk in Vayikra Beis, and he shall bring the mincha near the Mizbeach. So the words B'nei Aaron Lifnei Hashem are a repetition, repetition. And yet the avoda of Hagasha is not likuv, it's not critical. And the Gemara answers that no. The reason why the Torah repeats itself is for the following reason. Okay, so now, I don't know if you have in your Gemara diagram, but we're going to have to analyze the diagram. So basically what you have is the following. You've got the Azora, let's say on your right side, which would be equivalent to your eastern side, and you've got your Heichal on the left side, which would be your western side. So you've got east and west. Now you have north and south. The Mizbeach is situated, okay, there are many, many shittas exactly where the Mizbeach is situated in the Azor. For our purposes right now, we'll change our mind in a few minutes. The Mizbeach is smack in the middle between the north and the south. And keep in mind that the width of the Mizbeach is 32 amos. Now, if you draw a beeline going to the west, you will end up exactly in the middle of the Heichal, meaning the Pesach of the Heichal is 10 amos high. The Heichal itself is 20 amos. If you add the 10 to the 20, you get to 32 amos, and the Mizbeach is 32 amos in width. So the point is that if the avodah, the mincha, has to be done next to the Mizbeach, but it also says in the Torah that it has to be Lifnei Hashem, and Lifnei Hashem means it's got to be parallel or opposite to the entrance into the Heichal. That's called Lifnei Hashem. Then obviously we're going to require that the avodah of the mincha be implemented on the western side of the Mizbeach. That's Lifnei Hashem. The sign we learned in the Brisa, Lifnei Hashem is Yochel B'Marav. It should be on the western side, because that western side is Lifnei Hashem. It's opposite the entrance into the Heichal. But on the other hand, Talmud Lom, we have another pasuk that contradicts it, because the pasuk says El Pnei HaMizbeach. Now, what's Pnei HaMizbeach? Pnei HaMizbeach means that when you go up to Keves, that's how you enter into the Mizbeach. That's called Pnei HaMizbeach. Well, guess what? That's on the south side. So where are you going to do the Avodas HaMincha? Are you going to do it Lifnei Hashem, which means on the west side, or are you going to do it El Pnei HaMizbeach? The Pnei HaMizbeach means the face of the Mizbeach as you enter the Mizbeach, which is on the south side. So where do you do it? On the south side, on the west side? El Pnei HaMizbeach Yochel B'Dorim. We should come to the conclusion that's on the south side. But we just came to the conclusion that Lifnei Hashem is on the western side. Is Talmud Lom Lifnei Hashem? HaKetzad. How do we reconcile this? The pasuk Lifnei Hashem indicates that it's going to be on the west side of the Mizbeach, whereas the pasuk of Pnei HaMizbeach means it's got to be on the south side. So is it the west or the south? And the answer is Magisha v'Keren Dromis Marovis Keneged Chudo Shel Keren V'Dayo. Right? So you have the Mizbeach and you have the Heichal. What you're going to do is you're going to do the Avodas HaMincha on the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach. Why? Because then you have both El Pnei, which means as you enter in on the south side, and you also have Lifnei Hashem, which is an area that's connected the Heichal. So that's going to be the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach. So now, since we need the pasuk that indicates that Zosar Samincha Hakriv Osa B'nei Aaron Lifnei Hashem to tell you exactly where the mincha should be performed, therefore that's not called a repetition, and therefore we don't apply Rav's principle that whenever the Torah repeats itself, it's likuva. Now, what does it mean for Loma Akva? I think he means Achila Shiraim. Let's see. Oh no, we're talking about Hagasha. Sorry. Okay, so at this point we're good. Oh, so the Gemara now wants to quote the end of the Brisa. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, he has a different take on reconciling this apparent contradiction as to where the mincha should be brought. Yochol Yagishena Marocha Shel Keren Lidroma Shel Keren. Maybe you have two choices. Maybe the Torah is saying that the Hagasha could be Lifnei Hashem on the western side, or El Pnei Hashem on the southern side. You have two choices. Amrit. Kol mokush atamotze shnei mikros. Whenever you find a contradiction between two psukim, then you have to analyze it in the following way. Sometimes one pasuk completely excludes the other pasuk. But the other pasuk doesn't necessarily exclude, right? So A excludes B, but B does not necessarily exclude A. Echad Makayim Atzum Makayim Chavero. You can have your cake and eat it, and you could be Makayim both psukim. The Echad Makayim Atzmo Umevatos Chavero. But if you do it that way, then you negate the other way. What do we do in such a case? So I can anticipate that we want to make peace, right? So manichem es hamakayim atzum v'atal chavero, v'tovsin es hamakayim atzum makayim chavero. It makes more logical sense that we follow that pasuk and its requirements. That could also shtim, it could also be reconciled with the other pasuk. Oh, so now let's see how this applies in Rabbi Eliezer's frame of reference to the apparent contradiction about south versus west. But keep in mind, as we'll soon see, that Rabbi Eliezer has a different position of the Mizbeach. And the Mizbeach is not going to be in the center, equidistant from the north and the south, but it'll be in the north. Shatomer Lifnei Hashem b'Marov, fine. What are you going to do? You're going to do it in the Marov? Well, the Marov doesn't even reach the Lifnei Hashem, because now you've placed the altar all the way up on the north. When it was in the middle, then you could have a beeline to the Heichal. Shata Omer El Pnei HaMizbeach B'Darim Kiyamta Lifnei Hashem. But on the other hand, if you're going to use the pasuk Pnei Hashem, Pnei HaMizbeach, the front of the Mizbeach, which we said the front of the Mizbeach is on the south side, right? Because north is here and south is here. Is then Kiyamta Lifnei Hashem. Why? Because if the Mizbeach is all the way on the north, then the bottom line of the Mizbeach, so to speak, is going to be parallel to the Lifnei Hashem, to the Heichal. Heichal Kaima, Rav Ashi, Kosover Haitana, Haitana, meaning Rabbi Eliezer, Kula Mizbeach B'Tzofankoi. The entire Mizbeach is in the north. North, meaning of the Azor. So therefore, if you look at the south, it's already Keneged HaHechal. Maskif la Rav Huna. Now we're going back to Rav. Rav's ruling that if it repeats itself, it's likuva. Harei melach. What about the requirement to add salt? The lo tanabe kra. The Torah only requires melach in one pasuk. And yet, uma akvila, we know that the mincha without the salt is invalid. Why? Where's the tanabe? Where's the repetition? This Sanya we learned to the Brisa, Bris Melach Olam Hi. And this pasuk is in Bamidbar Perek Yud Ches. It says, Kol Trumos Hakadoshim Asher Yerimu Pnei Bnei Yisrael Hashem Nasati L'chol V'nechol V'nosecha Ata Itcha L'chak Olam Bris Melach Olam Hu I L'fnei Hashem L'chol Zarach Achrecha. And the Brisa says that there's another reason why Melach is likuva, it's essential, because the Torah says, Bris Melach Olam Hi, Shetehei, here we turn to the Avchav, Bris Amura B'Melach, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So now we have a pasuk that salt has to be applied to all karbanos, and it's a bris. And I guess the word bris, according to Rabbi Yehuda, tells you it's likuv. It's absolutely critical. He writes here again, in the English is a little bit ambiguous. He says essentiality is intrinsic to an eternal covenant. Okay, very fancy. And let's just finish up. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Nemar Kan Bris Melach, Olam Hi, V'Nemar Lahalon, Bris Kahunas Olam. All right, this pasuk is in Bamidbar Perek Chaf Hey. This was the gift that was bestowed upon Pinchas of Bris Kahunas Olam. Is kshem she efshel karbonos below kahuna, kachi efshel karbonos below melach. Anyway, we see that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon agree that melach is essential, and that's against Rav, who says that essentiality depends upon if the Torah repeats itself. Rav Yosef, Rav ketana didan svirle di omer lo molach kosher, that melach is not essential. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop for today. I wish you a great Shabbos. And Baruch Hashem, we've caught up, except that now we have Shabbos, and that's the problem. Okay. Kol tov, have a good Shabbos.